Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Communications and Cigars. I'm your host, John Crook. Thank you for tuning in. Season 3, Episode 11, which entitled Repeater Controllers. What are they good for, right? So we're going to talk tonight about repeater controllers. That's what we're going to talk. And the reason I wanted to bring up this subject is that in the past, we've talked about repeaters, and I was at Hamcation. That's why we didn't have an episode last week, but I was at Hamcation. And while I was there, I met and got to speak to a very interesting company, ICS Controllers, and they have a very interesting product. But as I started to talk a little bit more with some people about it, I started to find out that people aren't really aware of what repeater controllers are, what they do, and more importantly, kind of like one of those like, okay, well, maybe I think maybe it should be something that we should talk about on the show because we need repeater controllers in order to do repeater stuff. So we'll get to that all in 1 second here. We'll kind of cover the basics. But first of all, welcome, like I said, to Communications and Cigars. What is Communications and Cigars? Well, we meet here every Monday night at 8 p.m. or try to. Occasionally we will have an episode. So like last weekend, we didn't have an episode because, well, we were traveling. But then we have talk about communications, and then sometimes we talk about cigars also too. And so kind of an interesting concept. Once again, people always ask, where did this concept come from? Well, it came back from 3 years ago in September. We were going ahead and talking about it. Wanted to talk a little bit about communications, have kind of a chat, and then kind of enjoy a cigar with it. So with that, before we jump in, let's go ahead and do our normal routine. And we want to thank everybody for tuning in. We thank you for your subscribing, your viewer support, everything like that on there. But guess what? We do not ask for funding or anything like that from you. We go ahead and we get funding from our sponsor, which is JJK Communications. That's right. JJK Communications pays for all this kind of fun stuff on there. And if you ever have a question for the show, contact us at communications-cigars. Once again, communications-cigars at jjkcom.com. Once again, they help us sponsor the show here, give us the equipment that we need, give us the funding, and we are really gratefully appreciative of that on there. But let's go ahead and jump back into what tonight's subject was. Oh, you know what? I would be remiss if I didn't go ahead and talk about one last thing. I want to thank you to everybody that went along and participated in a cigar exchange. Had a total of 8 exchanges. So 8 exchanges, which is pretty good. It was kind of amazing. I was surprised to see how many people actually do partake in cigars. So we do appreciate everybody for doing that. The weather is slowly getting better, more and more and more. So once the weather gets super better, which I guess that's a relative term, but then we're going to enjoy some of those cigars and maybe even move the show back out to Studio P and the porch there and have a cigar while we enjoy the show, or maybe have a couple guests on there while we're doing that on there. But anyways, let's jump into what tonight's show is all about, which is repeater controllers. So with a repeater controller, it's pretty simple, pretty basic concept. You have a device, you have a radio, you have a receive radio, and you have a transmit radio. What happens with that receive radio versus a transmit radio? The radio receives, one radio transmits. But you have to have something that goes in between the two in order to be able to communicate with one another. So basically what you're saying is I need a device that's going to say, okay, when there's audio on the receive side, that receiver radio says, hey, wait a minute, I'm receiving something. Let me send a signal over to the transmitter to tell the transmitter to key up by what I'm going to pull off my speaker side of my radio and put into the transmit side of there. So if you really think about it, once again, 2 radios, the receive, so the speaker or the audio coming out of the receive radio goes to the microphone on the transmit radio. But then you have to have some wires in between that are going to go ahead and saying, okay, hey, wait a minute. I want to go ahead and when I receive a signal, that's when I'm going to cause you to transmit. So in essence, when we're talking about a controller, there's a couple different things that are needed for that controller. So first of all, you're going to have the actual repeater. How do I say brains? That's the easiest way to put it. And I kind of hesitate. It's like, how do you say? Because it's the brains. Because what the brains, aka the controller, needs to do, it needs to say, I'm listening, I'm listening, I'm listening. But now, over here, I need to be able to tell. So I need to listen and talk at the same time, because that's what a repeater does, right? So that's where it all kind of comes into play. Now, does every repeater have a controller? Yes and no. Controllers can get really fancy. So a controller can be nothing more than a simple basic circuit, okay? And really it is. It's just a couple components, really. It's not even like it's not necessarily a circuit or anything like that, but it's a couple components. And what those components do is basically the radio puts out what they call a core or a COS sense. Core, excuse me, stands for carrier operated relay, or COS, which stands for carrier operated squelch. Either way, what it's going to do is that when that receive radio hears something, it's going to go ahead and it's going to create a sense in the radio, so an output. And then output is either going to go active high, meaning from 0 volts to about +5, so +3 to +5 volts, or it's going to go active low, which means normally it's anywhere from +3 to +5 volts, and then it drops down to 0 volts, okay? Whatever your radio has set up, because a bunch of different radios operate in different ways, that then is going to tell this controller or these circuits that when this happens, you're going to go ahead and you're going to pull that, usually, and it's pulling, meaning going to ground, pull that PTT line low and cause the radio to transmit. Now, what happens in that case then is that you need to have an audio source passing from the receiver to the transmitter. And how you get the audio out of the receiver versus how you put it into the transmitter, that's a bunch of different ways, okay? Some people will say it needs flat audio. Some people say it'll be modulated audio, emphasis, de-emphasis, all this kind of stuff, all those different signal levels and everything like that in there. But we're not digging down that deep into it tonight. So what we're doing now is we're talking about it. So once again, receive radio, here's a signal. It gives an output saying, okay, key up, okay, and then I'm sending this audio, goes into that controller or those circuits, and that circuit or components then goes ahead, causes the radio transmit, and then takes that audio that it passes through and goes to there. Okay, do you actually need anything to do it? Actually, you don't. You could use what they call NPN transistors. You can go ahead and use whatever you want in order to take that sense and signal do it. So, do you always need a controller? No. Does it help if you have a controller? Yes. And the reason it helps if you have a controller is because you can do a few more things that you normally can't do without a controller. And I say that because these days radios are pretty sophisticated, right? There are simple basic radios, right? You pick up the radio, you push the talk, release the listen, that's it, right? And then there are some other radios that are like little computers. And I mean, most of the radios these days are like little computers, right? But then they can do audio and beeping and booping and blah, blah, and all these kind of things like that on there. So when that happens, it really comes down to your, how do you want to say, your intent. So a controller, once again, is going to give you some of that, those outputs, those ports, a little bit able to do things that you may not be able to do. So I'm going to go ahead and, once again, put it over here. So this is the company called ICS Controllers. Really cool, interesting. They have a couple products here. So the first product that they kind of have is what they call the Pipeater. And then they have the Pipeater 1. So the Pipeater 1X is really just a single repeater board. It has IOs in and out of the repeater board. It has your audio coming in. It has a core sense it's looking for. It has your audio going out. And then it has that PTT sense coming out. Very simple, very easy. The reason I like it is because it's built on a Raspberry Pi. Now, you have, see here, Pipeater 2. Pipeater 2 is, as you can see on here, A lot more intense. PyPeter 2 is now giving you multiple ports. So when you have, excuse me, things on a controller, you may have multi ports on there. The concept of multi ports is that you may have multiple radios linked together, or you may want to link different things together. So in essence, what can happen sometimes is you can have just a simple basic repeater, which is just receive in, okay, and then transmit out. Or you might have something that's more advanced like this, where it has receive in and transmit out, but then it has a secondary function on there too. Like maybe you can control 2 repeaters at one time, or maybe you control a repeater and a linking radio, or maybe an external connection on the radio. Different strokes, different folks, different purposes for people, right? It all depends on what you want to do or how you want to have it. Now, with that, the sky's the limit on controllers, because then you can go up to like this beast here, and this piece is a PyPeter 8. And when we say PyPeter 8, we're meaning is you take a look on here, 8 different ports to do that. Now, each port, in essence, can have 8 single repeaters, or 1 repeater with voting sites, or whatever you want to do, however you want to integrate it together. That's totally 100% up to you. It comes down to what your design is. Now, when we're talking about controllers, it's important to understand that controllers offer a wide variety of things, okay? It's not just an amateur thing. If you have a GMRS repeater, you're going to have a repeater controller. If you have, obviously, amateur, you're going to have a repeater controller. If you have commercial equipment, to a degree, you have a controller. Now, some of these controllers may be internal. Some of these controllers may be external. And in this case, what we see on here, what we're talking about is these are the external controllers. Okay, that's what these are. These will give you that concept, that ability to be able to go ahead and saying, listen, here's what I have. I have a repeater, and I want to be able to make it, and saying, I just want to be able to do A, B, C, and X, Y, Z, and control it and everything like that on there. Great, that's fine. That's not a problem whatsoever. But once again, bells and whistles and everything come into play on there. So what I'm going to do here now is let's go back over to our screen here. And this is just something I picked off the internet, okay? And what we're going to see here on this one is we're basically seeing a concept of what a controller is with a repeater. Now, repeaters are usually thought of to be these giant, huge machines, 100 feet in the air, 200 feet, 300 feet, whatever, up in the air on these big mountain tops or big ranges and everything like that on there. And guess what? That's not necessarily the case. In this example we see here, there's 2 radios. Now, bar the frequencies. Let's not get petty on the frequencies here. But basically, it's going in and showing is that you have one handheld, and then in this case, goes into that controller. And then once that controller hears that signal, senses that signal, then it's going to go ahead and key up the other radio. Now, the reason I say this and give this example is because there are some cases where, yes, you may need a repeater, which is basically in on one frequency, out another frequency at the same time with, increases your power outage. Okay, cool. That's the concept of repeater. You may have repeaters that have, once again, a link radio established to it, meaning you have your normal repeater operation, but then there's another link radio that's included within it. And you may have repeaters which are not just unidirectional, meaning it receives and then it transmits, but maybe in this case here, where you have a scenario where you have to connect 2 different types of systems and radios together. Maybe you're connecting a UHF analog to a VHF digital, or a 800 megahertz trunk to a low band FM, whatever the case may be. This all kind of comes into play when we're talking about it. And it's all done through this little box right here, which is a controller. Now, I purposely am showing different controllers for different purposes. And the reason I'm showing for different purposes is because not all controllers are made the same. Not all applications are going to be made the same because of what the you can almost call it the mission critical or design or use purpose is going to go ahead and be on there. All right. Once again, you may have a controller which is like this. One radio receives, one radio transmits. Or you may have a repeater or a controller set up where it receives and transmits, but then this will receive and then it transmits back the other way. Those are what sometimes you call bidirectional repeaters, or if they're going across two bands, you'll hear the term crossband repeater being used. All right. Now, that is kind of the essence concept of that. Now, when I'm talking about controllers, I kind of made a reference that sometimes they're external and sometimes they're internal. Now, where this is going to come into play is what you are using for equipment. What I mean by what you're using for equipment is because sometimes if you're going to go ahead and get let's say a Motorola repeater or a Kenwood repeater, and you, whatever the case may be, but you go ahead and you make a repeater, in that case, you're purchasing a repeater, the controller is internal to that repeater, all right? There's no excluding parts. There's no anything like that on there. They're all in essence part of the repeater itself. So that's what I'm going ahead and saying is that sometimes the controller is actually inside the repeater itself, and I think that's the key main thing here is because it's not external. There's no internal parts to it. There's nothing like that whatsoever. And I'm going to pull up another screen here real quick, and I'm just going to do this here. So bear with me for a quick second here, folks. And I'm going to do that here. Just here's a good case example here. Here's that Motorola repeater we're talking about. It's all enclosed on it. So what you see here is you see the little status lights for receive and transmit, but inside here is a receiver, inside here is a transmitter, inside here is an internal controller. Okay, if I pull up the back of it, of course, they don't have a picture of the back of it, but if I was to pull up a picture of the back of it, you would see over here, well, there's kind of a picture of it. You would see over here, there's different connections and everything like that for it. But what in essence is happening is that you can access the internal controller, but it's built in. You don't need to have it as an external controller. Now, I stress this a lot because repeater making is fun. I enjoy it. It is a really great blast. I have a great time with it. That's what's kind of gotten me into repeating. But as we take a look at it and we see the different things on there, we can start to, in this day and age, get extremely complex. And what I mean by extremely complex is that it's not just, once again, before the concept of the repeaters was you have one signal come in FM, on, let's say, VHF, and then it goes out on VHF, FM, but increased power. Now you have different aspects that are starting to build off of things on there, where you have these crossband repeaters and whatever. Now, one of the most, I think, overlooked, underestimated things on there is when we're talking about vehicle repeater systems. And that is going to be what we have up on the screen here. And this is probably the oldest form, I would have to say, at least in the commercial world, of crossband repeating. And answer her right, crossband repeating. So what this example is here is that you have a user with the radio right here, okay? This is a user right here. So it's a little officer, right? Now, in some locations, some areas, handheld coverage is not part of the system design, okay? I have that with like my commercial systems. I have that with some of my amateur stuff. You can use a handheld within such a range, but then when you're out of that range, then what you do is you go ahead and you turn around and you're saying, okay, now I need to have more oomph, okay? I can't hit the tower because I'm too far away or I'm in a building or something. So what you do then is you take this device right here, the handheld, and then it goes from the officer's belt right to this device here, which is a mobile repeater. The mobile repeater then is connected to the mobile radio, and that mobile radio then transmits it out to the tower. So instead of going across here like this between the two, it has a little stop in between. Now, yes, you are going from a handheld to a repeater, which goes to a repeater system. Yep, it does. But the reason I say this is probably one of the most, I want to say the longest kind of history of a crossband is because back in the day, Wisconsin State Patrol did this, and I know some counties did this. These radios were on UHF. So from the officer to the hand, or for the mobile, okay, from the officer to that mobile of theirs, they were on UHF. But once it hit the mobile radio, then it went out on VHF. But now, and the reason they did that was because of actually antennas and interference with one another, right? So if you actually think about it, on the squad, it was just a dual band antenna, UHF and VHF. UHF and VHF aren't going to interfere with one another, right? So then you would come in on UHF and then you cross over to VHF, alrighty? Now they've changed it. Now there's enough technology, filtering, stuff that we know where we can go on portable for VHF to the repeater on VHF, and then the car goes out on VHF. Or 700 and 800 to 700, 800. You have this whole mix and mash of things. Even in this picture here, what you're seeing is this person's using digital to go to the mobile repeater, which isn't digital, which crosses over to the radio, which goes out digital on there. So now you have that whole situation of like, oh my God, what the hell's going on here? Well, we got a pretty extensive systems on there. Okay. And that's what kind of makes it happen. As we start to grow more and more and more with systems, and we start to see this thing kind of there. If your radios are multiband capable, okay, you may have this as a multiband radio. And for an example, let's say you may go from your portable to your car on, let's say, 800 megahertz, and then go out on VHF, but then your portable is also capable of VHF. And in that terms, then you could say, okay, wait a minute, I got my portable here. I'm going to go ahead and key up. And now if I'm close enough, I can go directly to the tower. Or if I'm out of range of my squad here, I can just go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to go direct to the system. That can happen. That's where these multi-band portables, multi-mode portables and radios all come into play. The amateur world, we kind of cheat a little bit. We have had dual band radios for the longest time. So what you could do is you could go on your handheld radio on, let's say, UHF, and your car does the crossbanding, goes out to the amateur system on VHF, or VHF and UHF. Or some people, like me, will build mobile repeaters into our amateur radio. So we will have a radio that maybe can't crossband, or maybe that that isn't designed to crossband, it hasn't because it's a single receiver or whatever. Voila, we have this option where we could take and add on crossband repeating into there with mobile repeating and everything like that in there. But getting back, we're not talking about that. The reason I bring this up is because the question saying is like, well, where's a controller? Do I have an external controller? Well, no, you don't have an external controller. This is going to be another situation where, like, in this device right here is your controller and that receiver transmitter for talking out there, and then it's crossing over and sending the signals to the radio. So the mobile radio is just saying, hey, I'm just a radio that receives and transmits. That's all I am. But this additional add-on you have to it, that's what then goes and says, ha, here's what it is. I'm going ahead and crossing over, and I have that controller built into there. So controllers, once again, are not always built in regards to being this external device that's on there. And I'm trying to find some more kind of things on here. You know what I mean? Here's some more kind of repeater controllers. And I mean, like I said, the world is full and flush with them. You can go ahead and take a look here. I'll bring up another on here. Like I said, I really like the ICS group there. The guys there, I mean, just super, super awesome and stuff like that on there. But this is what also some of those controllers can give you. Some of those controllers can allow you to control via DTMF, allow you to turn things on and off. You name it. A controller really gives the external aspect of things, whereas compared to looking here, where you have really no control over it. You might have a button right here, along here, that turns the repeater on and off. So if you push this button, maybe it goes ahead and turns off the power to the repeater. Okay, fine, that's sort of controlling it. But really, you're not doing anything like that. Where in this case, you can send DTMF codes. You know, you can have memories. You can have these kind of things. You can have voice announcements. You can have, you name it, right? The controllers provide external types of sources on there. And realistically, they can, if I go ahead and pull up another here, here's another one. You really can make it really diversified for what you want. But here's, once again, we see separate tones, cost tones, courtesy tones. once again, sky's the limit with controllers, and you're only really going to be limited by what you want to do, or for the most part, money. I mean, an eight port controller. Goodness gracious, what are you going to do all there? Well, that really kind of comes into play and does a whole bunch of other things. But nevertheless, that's what controllers are able to offer people, and for them to be able to do. Now comes to that part of the show, that time of the show, where you know what really bends my antenna? You know what really bends my antenna is when I go ahead and I find out that I actually have a controller myself, and it's actually told my wife, and she acts like a repeater controller and hears things and then tells me what to say. I'm just kidding. Love you, honey. But what really bends my antenna this week is that people think that you have to have high grade, high quality controllers, and you can't really make a repeater out of two radios or something like that. Well, no, you can. That is in essence what a repeater is. It's all going to come down to the controller, though. And that's where people say you need to have big, expensive controllers and everything like that. Well, I'm going to tell you something. In the many, many worlds of radio that I live in and portray, I will tell you this. Repeater controllers are like snowflakes. Really, there's no two that are the same. And to be perfectly honest with you, it's kind of a left Twix, right Twix kind of thing also. In that, guess what? I like this repeater controller because it could do this, and I like this repeater controller can do this. And guess what? They're all in essence the same thing. They really are, but it comes down to what the beeps and the boops and all that kind of stuff you want the repeater controller to do. That picture I showed you earlier in the episode where it was just two handles tied together, guess what? You don't need an expensive, super duper, high quality, $700,000 controller, do you? No, you don't. You just need that little box, which is going to pull the audio and the receive sense off the receive radio and send it out to the transmit. That's it. Voila. Okay? But if you're going to be running a multi-mode system, a multi-connected system, a system that may have a repeater controller used for maybe mission-critical purposes or emergency communication purposes, and you want to have the National Weather Service alert thing come into there and blah, 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 and add all these things, guess what? Probably not going to buy that little cheap one that I showed you earlier. You're probably going to want to spend money on something like an 8-port or something like that whatsoever. It really comes down to what you really have in mind or what you really want to play. The biggest thing that I will tell you hands down from doing this over and over and over again is that you have to have the proper controller matched to the proper radio. No, wait a minute, John. You were just saying earlier it's a radio in there. Right. This is what goes ahead and causes the repeaters to sound bad or not work properly, and what really bends my antenna. Don't just buy a repeater controller to say, okay, I bought this repeater controller. Great. Now I just hook up my radios to it. No, some radios will interface with great ease to certain controllers, and other radios will interface to the point of like you're opening it up and like, oh my God, I got to go ahead and find this point and tap and this and this and this because it's a limitation of the controller. No, do your research on your controllers. Shop around, okay? Ask people what it is. Heck, email me even. We'll talk about controllers, right? They all have different aspects and different things. The concept, once again, is pretty simple. Audio in with the signal to cause the repeater controller to activate the push to talk for the transmit and send the audio out. Yeah, that's pretty simple, pretty easy, standard across the board. But once again, come into what you need it to do. If you need a simple basic controller, buy a simple basic controller and understand if you don't need more, don't spend your money on it. Be familiar with your controllers also. I can't stress that enough. Know the ins and outs of your controllers. I've been involved in clubs and groups and organizations and talked to people on customization and repeater controllers for businesses and everything like that on there that they've turned around and they were like, okay, what do you want to do? Well, we want to do this and this and this, and I guess we got to buy a new controller and this, and how much is it going to cost us and everything like that. And you look at the equipment and you say, okay, no, it could do this. We just need to activate this and turn this on. And I get blank stares. Like, why the hell did you tell me that we could do this? Well, why didn't you? Lots of times I see, if anything, you go ahead and people will buy more than what they actually need. Alrighty. And that's why I brought up, once again, the ICS controller people. once again, I don't work for them. It sounds like I work for them. It sounds like I got like a company romance with them or something. I just like and I met them up at CPAC, but they once again they sell you different controllers for your different needs, and that's what you need to have. Make sure you have the right controller to do your job, and don't be controller shamed. I guess a new thing. I guess we can call controller shaming is, oh, you don't have the right controller to do this and this and this and this. No, make sure it fits your needs and make sure you do it right. And then also too is make sure you take the time to understand what your controller needs to do and needs to see for signals. That's going to be the last part. People who don't have that and get that frustrated or hook it up wrong and don't do it correctly, your repeater sounds like horrible, and you blame it on the radios or the users, where it's really that controller that's causing the issue on there. And once again, that's this week's, you know what really bends my antenna. So that's it for this week's episode of Communications and Cigars. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. As a matter of fact, we got to go up to the sites today and play with some repeaters and have some fun on there. We'll maybe try to get some videos next time on the whole systems and stuff like that, and maybe dig a little more. If we get some feedback and saying, John, I want to see a controller in action. I want to see you wire it up. I want to see this and this and this. Okay, maybe we'll go ahead and do it from there. But hey, if you ever see it or have questions, feel free to email me, and we'll get that kind of, we'll take down those suggestions and go from there. So until then, everybody, I want everybody to stay safe, take care, and like I said, the weather's finally getting better, 40 degrees for February. All right. Make sure you relax, and if you got them, folks, go ahead and enjoy them. Until next week, everybody.